So just to say welcome to this webinar on the monitoring and evaluation of WaterAid's work on WASH system strengthening. Thank you very much for joining us. The content for this presentation will be presented by Hannah and Ben from the UK and Caesar from Uganda. Hannah provides technical support to country programs in their system strengthening work, in particular for country programs in Asia and Africa, implementing what we refer to as the SUSWASH project. And Ben is the monitoring and evaluation advisor who has supported the piloting of this new approach with the 4 SUSWASH country programs. And Caesar is the project manager for the SUSWASH project in Uganda. And my name is Simon Early, and I'm the Accountability and Effectiveness Manager working for WaterAid in the UK. So just to be clear why we're here, in terms of the objectives for this presentation, it's to share WaterAid's pilot approach to monitoring system strengthening that we've developed. And we really want to learn from you and your experience in what we consider to be a challenging area. And just to emphasize that we're very much, it's a work in progress, it's a pilot, but we just wanted to share where we'd got to. So we're really not presenting to you as a fait accompli, a finished product, but a work in progress, and really to get your input and reflections. So just in terms of what we're going to cover, how the session will be structured, we'll begin with a short introduction from Hannah on our system strengthening work at WaterAid, how it has developed and the journey we've been on in monitoring this work that has brought us to this pilot. She'll then hand over to Ben, who will present the tool developed for the M&E of system strengthening last year. It was developed with the support of a consultant working with our country programs in terms of what would work for them. And that's then been piloted, as I said, by our 4 SUSWASH countries. And then in terms of the country experience, we'll hand over to Caesar to take us through Uganda's experience of piloting this tool. We'll then finish with next steps from our side. As I said, this is very much a work in progress, so where we've got to and what we consider to be the next steps following the pilot, which should then leave us plenty of time for discussion to get your thoughts on what we're trying to do, how we're trying to go about it, and also provide an opportunity for you to share how you are going about the monitoring of your system strengthening work and similarities and differences with what we've presented, and possibly identify opportunities to collaborate going forwards. So that's a quick introduction from me and a quick overview, and I'll now hand over to Hannah to take you through a quick introduction of system strengthening at WaterAid.
Thanks, Simon. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so as Simon says, I'll just go through the evolution of this work at WaterAid and system strengthening. So next slide, please, Simon. Great. So, and apologies for those of you who attended the webinars last week. Some of these slides will overlap with those, so do forgive me for that. So just briefly, for us at WaterAid, and many of you will see similarities in your own work for WASH system strengthening. Our aim is really to bring about inclusive, lasting WASH for people. That is the core of our mission and what we're aiming to do, particularly for marginalised and vulnerable communities and people. So that's at the core of our mission. But around the realisation of those lasting and inclusive WASH services, there are a number of people, institutions or actors that play a role in the delivery of inclusive and sustainable WASH. And you can see some of these on the slide here. And then there are also a number of functions or factors that also play a role in the delivery of that inclusive and lasting WASH. And you can see some of them here, such as monitoring, financing, accountability, planning. And between all of these factors and actors are relationships and dynamics that affect whether or not those WASH services reach everyone and last. And this is depicted by these lines linking these different components together. And these can include gender norms, power dynamics, structural inequalities, information flows that have a role to play in whether or not WASH services reach everyone and last. So within that system or ecosystem are a number of barriers that can arise that affect whether or not the system works in a way that delivers inclusive, lasting WASH. And you can see these here by these red no entry signs. And again, those are some of the barriers that I just mentioned that affect whether or not WASH lasts and is inclusive. So we're trying to unblock some of these systemic barriers that are in the WASH system in different contexts within the SUSWASH programme. As WaterAid, that we have a level of influence within the WASH system to bring about that change. And so working in partnership and in collaboration to try and unblock some of these systemic barriers within the WASH system in the various countries in which we work and at multiple levels, from district to national levels. So that's really how we're conceptualizing the WASH system, just to set the scene. We've tried to break some of this complexity and the messiness of the WASH system down by using building blocks or a building block framework, which you can see here and which many of us on the call have talked about a lot. And Agenda for Change obviously have a set of building blocks, and these are just WaterAid's kind of conceptual framing of what those building blocks are. And we've used them in the SUSWASH programme and in some of our other country programme and projects to try and break down that complexity and identify where we might be able to bring about change within the system, where those leverage points might be, and not just a building block framing, but this kind of building block analysis is supported by other assessment tools such as political economy analysis, barrier analysis. And so this building block framework really tries to help us to break down that complexity, to design a WASH system strengthening intervention. And we've also applied a similar sort of framing to structure how we measure change. Next slide, yeah. So we've kind of used that frame, that foundational framing as a way of feeding into the design of the system strengthening measurement framework. So it's been an evolving process with regards to SUSWASH and the pilot. It's been an evolving process from, next slide please, Simon. From the start, where we were really looking at the barriers within the WASH system through and using a number of different tools, analysis tools, such as a building block analysis tool, working through or holding participatory context analyses workshops with local stakeholders to go through a series of exercises to arrive at a picture of what the WASH system looks like, complementing that by where possible, a baseline of WASH service levels, because it's really at that level in terms of WASH service levels that we want to see a change as a result of our system strengthening work and people gaining access or improvements in WASH service levels. So that's where this started, and we had quite a big focus on kind of traditional results frameworks and the development of new indicators at the start of the programme, and then recognizing that we need to adapt how we're measuring that change in the system and what impact our own system strengthening work was having on strengthening the WASH system. So started to develop a kind of project specific Excel spreadsheet that tries to track change within the system. and then recognizing that, you know, if WaterAid's focus is really going to emphasize system strengthening and WASH system change, then we need to really invest in an organizational system strengthening measurement framework. And so we're grateful for the Osprey Foundation, who's given us some support to be able to really focus our attention in developing this tool that we're presenting today, and pilot it through the SUSWASH country programs that are applying the framework in practice. So I'll leave it there. Oh, just one final point to say that obviously service levels are what we want to see improvements in as a result of our system strengthening work, and we have post-implementation monitoring surveys, or PIMs, that really try and track changes in service levels and the sustainability of the WASH services that we introduce. And those PIM surveys are undertaken every 5 years and look back up to 10 years after we've left a community. So it helps us to understand the impact, the long-term impact of our work more broadly. So this work would also be linked to that as well. I'll pass over to Ben now. Thanks, Simon.
Hi, everyone. Yes, next slide, please, Simon. So when conducting this, designing this tool, the first thing that we needed to do was to define what the key unit of analysis would be. And we've kind of made the location, i.e. a sub-national area, as the key unit of analysis. And the reason for that is we wanted a monitoring framework that wasn't, say, tied to just a particular set of funding, but actually something that would be able to track the progress that we are making over a period of time that outlasts any one project, or likewise, if there were multiple sources of funding in the same location, this tool would capture the change as a result of both of those pieces of funding. So it's very much not linked to any kind of particular piece of funding, but really focusing in on a particular geographic area. The way that we've designed the tool still allows us to record changes that, say, happen at a different administrative level, and to link them back. But it was important that we essentially identify what are the different geographies that we're applying our system strengthening approach in, and then where should we be doing that monitoring. So we take that as our sort of starting point, and then we use that building block structure as the overarching approach. And of course, as Hannah sort of already said, there are relationships between those and linkages between those building blocks, but we still needed some sort of structure that we could organize our thinking into for monitoring our process. And then finally, another key characteristic of the tool is that it's a balance of unstructured and structured information. So we wanted to enable some global aggregation through the tool. So I'll speak in a little bit about sort of what type of aggregation we can do. So we wanted to enable that. So that does mean that, say, we use, for example, drop-down lists of kind of predefined sets of stakeholders, or we kind of have a rating scale for recording the level of progress. But at the same time, obviously, as you all know, system strengthening work is, highly localized and needs to be applied to the context that you're operating in. So this means that rather than using, say, predefined outcomes or predefined indicators, the country program itself has the ability to define those outcomes as they would in any other type of results framework. And then likewise, in terms of reporting the progress, capturing the narrative is extremely important. So this is a tool that both has an element of kind of rating and scoring, but also the narrative element that it captures is really important, because that's really where the detail is, and you build your understanding of how you're working and what's working. Next slide, please, Simon. So yeah, just conceptually, I mentioned that the building blocks are the overarching structure. So we kind of, I guess, this is a sort of a very simplified and oversimplified theory of change, but thinking about, okay, how do we conceptualize the different levels, the results that we're trying to achieve, operate at. So essentially, if we're taking a WASH system at a subnational level, which is often a district, but it may be a province, what are the key outcomes within each building block that we want to achieve in the sort of the medium to long term? So we sort of frame those building block outcomes at a kind of 3 to 5 year timeline. And if we achieve those things, then that in theory should contribute towards a kind of a stronger WASH system at that subnational level. And then kind of below that, in the more short to medium term, what are the intermediate outcomes that we need to achieve in order to work towards that medium or long-term building block outcome? It probably also bears saying at this point, we are not so much with these intermediate outcomes and the building block outcomes, we're not so much trying to monitor the WASH system itself. This is more about trying to track our contribution to strengthening the WASH sector as WaterAid. So these outcomes and intermediate outcomes are defined in terms of what we as an organization in this area are trying to contribute to strengthen the WASH system in that area, rather than capture everything in the WASH system and to assess the strength of the WASH system within this structure. Next slide, please. So as it currently stands, our tool sits in Excel, but we have got plans to move it forward into something more user friendly. So it's an Excel tool, and we've broken it down into 5 steps, and then you can see there's a separate tab for each step. So I'm just quickly going to explain kind of what the process is, and it essentially kind of starts with essentially kind of setting up that monitoring framework, that articulation. That would be steps 1 to 3, and then steps 4 to 5 being the kind of the monitoring and the kind of reporting of your progress. And the idea here, as those sort of feedback arrows show, is that it's about learning, adaptation, and continuous improvement. So reflecting on the progress that you've made towards those outcomes, feeding that back in, reflecting on that, and potentially redefining the outcomes that you're working towards, maybe redefining which building blocks you're focusing on. So the first stage is step 1. So that's as described the subnational area selected, and that also is actually the assessment of the WASH system in that subnational area, that building block assessment. So that's our starting point. Having done all of the activities that you would need to do to inform that assessment, we then capture the final result of it in this tool in step 1. Then we then say, okay, so within the building blocks, which are the ones that we're focusing on in this subnational area, and we also kind of record why we've chosen to work on that building block, and why not. Maybe why are we not working on some? And we're trying to also gather the reasons for that. So is it because it's a kind of a strategic entry point to the rest of the system? Is it that we can achieve quick wins? Is it a priority? Likewise, are we not working on it because as WaterAid we don't have the right capacity to strengthen that area? or is it that we just think making progress is going to be incredibly challenging on that building block? So we're recording that information as well. And then step 3 is really that sort of key, more granular articulation of what you're trying to deliver. So this is, you know, Hannah sort of talked about results frameworks, kind of, this is where you would be going through that kind of similar process, but within this different structure around the building blocks of articulating what the outcomes and the intermediate outcomes that we want to achieve in the district. And again, just we're focusing here on what, as WaterAid, what we're trying to contribute to strengthen the system over the time period. So that those 3 steps together are kind of setting up your M&E system. The building block assessment in step 1 is something that, you know, we come back to periodically to assess, you know, the WASH system itself. Both in terms of context analysis, but also to see any progress that has been made in the WASH system. And then kind of steps 4 and 5, where we're reporting against our own contribution, are then done on a regular basis. And we're still working through what the right timeline is to do that. It might be quarterly, it might be 6 monthly, it might be annually. It might also be something that's, you know, flexible depending on the nature of the work that you're doing. So in step 4, you kind of look across all of those intermediate and building block level outcomes and record your progress against them. And then kind of having done all that, you kind of then look across all of the different building blocks and do an assessment of your progress overall. So Caesar is going to show you what this looks like in a little bit more detail. So I've just got one more slide, which is just about the kind of what are we able to generate at a global level. And, you know, some of those things are quite simple and straightforward, but also useful to know as an organization. So it enables us to map out all of the different subnational areas where we are applying our system strengthening approach. And likewise, to using that building block assessment to kind of see how we are assessing the strength of different WASH systems where we're working. Likewise, it also enables us to map out which building blocks we are working on. Are we focusing more on particular building blocks, and then kind of to reflect on that collectively as an organization. And likewise, within the building blocks, these are broken down into subcomponents. So also kind of highlighting where what we're prioritizing within the building blocks. I also mentioned that when we articulate an intermediate outcome, it's generally related to a specific group of stakeholders. So this also would enable us to map, you know, which types of stakeholders are we targeting within specific building blocks. And then essentially with all of those different elements, we're able to kind of monitor our progress using the way that we've rated our progress, which is a form of RAG rating at this stage of sort of red, amber, green rating. And then really what we're doing up is currently building up a database of information that can be used for meta-analysis, because by kind of recording this information, what it will do is enable us to then sort of take stock and look at the data and to see, are we making more progress on certain building blocks when we're working with certain stakeholders, for example, or kind of, you know, the opposite of that. So it does also build up this database that in the future could be very, very useful for learning. So that's it from me. So I'm just going to hand over to Caesar now.
Thank you very much, Ben. Can you hear me okay?
Caesar, we can't hear you. Can you
hear me okay?
I can hear okay. Can other people hear okay?
Very well.
Oh,
Yeah.
just me. Oh.
Okay. So I cannot project my video. I'm trying to manage my bandwidth. My internet is not so strong, so allow me to just present with my audio. Yeah, Caesar Chimbugwe is my name. I manage the SASWASH program in Uganda. So I want to share with you our country experience piloting the M&E for system strengthening in Uganda. Next slide, Simon. So in Uganda, what we did at the inception of this framework, so we convened different stakeholders that are implementing WASH within Kampala. So our main partner is Kampala Capital City Authority, and we're able to convene the different stakeholders and did an assessment of where the different building blocks in terms of the WASH systems were at. And initially, we had wanted to do this assessment looking at WASH as an aggregate area of the system. But then we realized that the three different domains of WASH could be at different levels within the system, at the different components of the building blocks. So you find, for instance, that water, if you look at the assessment results, water seems to be at a slightly look at WASH as a whole component, but you need to break it down. So in terms of the selection of the key building blocks where our focus as a country program is, we identified those that scored weak, and those are about 9 of them, and we focused on those. But again, within those, our focus again was informed by whether we have to focus on sanitation or hygiene, or whether we have to focus on all the three. So this kind of assessment really helps you to go much deeper beyond looking at the system as WASH, but then going down into the different domains of WASH and looking at where to focus, and also going further down for each of those domains, which particular building blocks do you focus on, whether it's water, do you look at policy and planning, or for sanitation, do you have to look at institutional arrangements, and you narrow it down to that level. So we are able to select 9 of them and left out 2 of those building blocks. Next slide. So in the next step, we're supposed now to, as WaterAid now, having engaged all the stakeholders that we collaborate with, now we are able to define our scope of work. So in defining the scope of work, really, it's a full plate. So how much can you really take? And that is determined by different factors in terms of the resources that we have as a country program, but also looking at the time frame that we want to deliver the different programs. So we're able to define that. And for each of those building blocks that we selected, the 9, we're able to define the sub-building blocks. Really, those sub-building blocks, for instance, if you look at the coordination building block, we identified having a strong stakeholder platform that brings together stakeholders within WASH in Kampala, and convening them to deliberate on different policy discourse. And also the other sub-building block looking at joint planning that requires that there is a much robust citywide plan that guides investment, but also building synergy among stakeholders, and then ensuring that there is cross-sectoral coordination. So defining further and breaking down those building blocks was critical within WaterAid, and then picking the pieces in terms of what we can do as a country program to make a contribution to the overall system strengthening. And then for each of those sub-building blocks, we define the outcomes. These really more long-term targets for us. And then for each of those outcomes, we define the intermediate outcomes. And these are more progress markers, because we appreciate that it really takes time to build a strong system. But you also need to identify how you're making progress and what kind of, how do you really assess yourself. You need to document whatever change that is happening to see if you're making the right traction. Then we also had to define the approach to use. In most cases, for most of these building blocks, you need to identify the right partners. You also need to work as closely as possible with the communities. In some instances, you need to be more of influencing, working closely with government, influencing from within. So we adopted different approaches for different building blocks. And also we did the mapping of who's doing what for purposes of building synergy and mapping out our value addition as WaterAid. For some of the building blocks and the commitments we've made, we have to leverage what others are doing and make a contribution as a collective to strengthen that particular building block. Next slide. So in terms of tracking progress, and that was introduced by Simon, by Ben as well in step 4. So what we do on a quarterly basis, we've been able to track our own progress internally in terms of the intermediate outcomes that we've set for each of the building blocks. And we meet quarterly and also at the end of the year to be able to see how we are progressing and also do score ourselves. So I picked out one example for one of the building blocks on community engagement. So we set out about 4 intermediate outcomes. I'm giving examples for 2 of those intermediate outcomes that we measured our progress. One of them was having a functional community structure that is established to advocate for wash rights in different communities. And by end of last year, we had set out 2 community groups. These ones, we call them participatory budget clubs, and these are formed to track public expenditure on wash. So they engage at the community level, but also they track expenditure within public institutions, mainly hospitals and public schools. And they do question value for money in terms of how those institutions are spending. And then they compile their community reports, and we used those reports to inform national level budget advocacy engagements in parliament and also engaging with line ministries. So in terms of the scoring for that, you can see that was scored with good progress. But then the other intermediate outcome where the community advocacy group are actively participating and also tracking the budgets, we had quite a number of issues in them doing that kind of work, especially in terms of accessing information to these public resources, how the resources are spent. In some of the institutions, they couldn't get that. And also, in as much as the legislation available provides for that, most of the administrators in these institutions were hesitant to provide it. So we had a bit of challenges in that. But and also in terms of scale up, we are still piloting this in a few communities within Kampala, so we hadn't taken it to scale. So that was rated limited progress in that. So this is what we use really to track our progress internally, and then we are able to translate that within the bigger stakeholders at the city level for them to also be able to provide their views and opinion on the same. Next slide, Simon. So in step 5, this is where now we bring it out, usually in an annual stakeholders engagement. And this is more of now looking at all the building blocks. It sort of links from the first step where we did the assessment and selected which building blocks to focus on. And this time around, we bring back those stakeholders to now see after a year or after 2 years or 3 years, how much are we progressing? Is there any traction for the different building blocks? Is there any change? If we are focusing on policy, strategy, and planning, is it still okay for us to focus on the same building block, or government has made good progress on that particular building block? Maybe now we need to shift our focus and put it on financing. Is it still challenging for us to work in sanitation? Is it hygiene? Is it water? So that kind of analysis is made with government. But of course, given the background discussions, the depth of those conversations, it requires time for just one building block to be critically analyzed, and everyone has consensus on the rating or the scoring. So sometimes you find that in some of those engagements, you can even just focus on 3 or 4 building blocks, and and you leave it at that, and then you have to continue in another space for you to be able to cover all of them. So basically, that's what we've been able to do in Uganda over the last 1 year of piloting this. And in terms of challenges, there's been it's been really very challenging to attribute change with changing the system. In many cases, some of the progress we are seeing, there's lots of other stakeholders who are making the contribution. And I think in step 3, we recognize that, and we do a mapping of who else is doing what. So it is really change of the collective, and sometimes even government has its own plans in terms of changing some of these systems. So now cutting your piece of cake and saying this is what our actual contribution has been can be challenging. And the second challenge really is about government not having the indicators that track change in a system. So their interest really is in the numbers, is in service delivery numbers. How many boreholes, how many water points, how many toilet facilities have been put in place. So they will not really focus so much on issues of accountability or ensuring that citizen voice is strong enough. So that has also been challenging, because from where we come from, we see this is the gist of ensuring that there will be sustainability in WASH, but then they continue to focus on the numbers, and that's their interest. So that has also been a bit challenging on our side. Then I think that is it that I can talk about.
That's great. Thank you, Caesar.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
That's brilliant. So just to finish before we open it up for discussion and your thoughts and reflections and any questions, just in terms of next steps. So we've taken you on our journey so far, if you like. Hannah presented where we are in terms of system strengthening and how we've structured that approach, and the challenges in terms of monitoring that work. Ben then presented the tool that's been developed for piloting with the SUSWASH countries, and Caesar took you through a snapshot of Uganda's experience in terms of using the tool. So as I said, as I began, this is very much a work in progress. So just quickly in terms of next steps, things that we want to do is to improve the tool and approach for pilot countries to take forward and use periodically. So how are we going to take the pilot feedback forwards in terms of how often, periodically, how often are we talking about, applying the tool? Is this a quarterly, 6 monthly or annual sort of assessment of progress? As Ben mentioned, we also want to transfer the tool from Excel to mWater. So mWater is a digital data collection tool that we use quite a lot for in WaterAid for a number of uses. But it will help us to take the tool to a more user-friendly and accessible platform. We then like to roll out the tool to further countries. We're not seeing it as a kind of a big bang to all 20 plus countries, but to start by expanding beyond the SUSWASH countries to other countries. We'd also like to link to separate work we're doing on what we've titled Indirect Reach, which is about collecting data on WASH access service levels in subnational areas where WaterAid is supporting system strengthening. So we recognise that changes in service level cannot be directly attributed to the system strengthening work of WaterAid or others, but it's still important to look at what changes we are or aren't seeing where we are doing this system strengthening work. We'd also like to develop analysis and reporting at the aggregated level to provide the global picture of system strengthening work as more countries are included. And Ben referred to this in terms of the global report slide. So because this approach is using both structured and unstructured information, it means that the structured information can be consolidated and presented across ultimately the 20+ country programs to provide a bigger picture of system strengthening at WaterAid. And finally, collaborate. So we are really keen to work with and learn from others in this area. Well, starting now, I guess. So that concludes the presentation. We'd really like to open it up for discussion. We've left ourselves just over 15 minutes for discussion. I don't know, Ben, if there's anything in the chat box that any questions or anything in the chat box, but please, if you would like to just contribute, then please just write in the chat box, and then we'll hand the microphone over to you to share your experiences and what similarities or differences your own approaches may be, or where you're at in terms of monitoring your system strengthening work. Ben, over to you first, just in case there is anything already that we can address.
Yeah, we've had quite a few things through in the chat box. So there's been a little bit of discussion around monitoring and measuring this kind of strength of the system overall. So I thought that I might just ask Hannah maybe just to speak to that first. And then there's also just been some discussion around the use that sort of mix of structured and sort of unstructured information indicators and outcomes, and whether to make them generic or so. I will take that question, and then there's a question for Caesar around kind of government engagement overall with the systems strengthening approach and kind of recommended advocacy strategy. So I think we'll take those three questions first in order, and then we'll look and see if there's anything else in the chat box that needs to be covered. So I'll hand over to you, Hannah, first.
Thanks, Ben. Sorry, could you just repeat the question for me? Sorry.
Yeah, let me find I believe the question was, I can't find it exactly, so whoever asked the question, if you do want to come in and clarify, that's fine. But essentially, are we doing anything that assesses the strength of the system itself, I guess, overall?
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you. Yes. I guess one way we've tried to do this, particularly at the start when you're setting up the internal kind of contribution of WaterAid's work or through of our system strengthening work, contributing to strengthening the WASH system, to inform what we do and therefore set that up, it requires an assessment of what the status or the strength of the WASH system is more broadly, to inform therefore what we do, and that takes into account what other people are doing. So it's that step one of the measurement framework where we look at the WASH system as a whole in that sub-national level, either a provincial level or district level, and look at the strength of the WASH system as a whole. And then periodically, perhaps, and we're still figuring out how often we do this, but in SUSWASH it's happened on an annual basis. Like the Cambodia team have reconvened the same stakeholders, government stakeholders and others working in the WASH system to come back and reevaluate the strength of the WASH system again. And so yeah, that's how we're kind of looking at any contextual changes that might have come about not related to necessarily the work we're doing, but also the work of others who are also working to strengthen the WASH system. And I'd say that the tool itself, through using the tool and measuring our progress against what we've set out to achieve, is also a way of looking at what has happened in the WASH system that isn't a result of our work, that others might have been working on. That means we might have to adapt and change what we're doing and change who we're working with. So that's also a way of how we're looking at what is happening outside of our own work in the WASH system. So I think, yeah, we're focusing on our contribution because it takes a lot of money and resources to do and assess this sort of work, but we are mindful of trying to track change in that wider system as well. Yeah, I can see Lewis. Yeah, do you want to come in?
Sure, Hannah, thanks. First of all, thank you for sharing all of this. It's great that the team is not only doing the work, but is willing to share at this stage and to take comments. And boy, were there a lot of comments in the chat. I think there were multiple questions about this because a lot of people were concerned that it really is the overall system strengthening that we're all concerned with. And I think you guys, it sounds like you feel the same way. And then I saw Simon's challenge that it's very hard to actually measure for attribution if it's WaterAid that's making that. And I think that sort of tied together the issue, which is that should there instead be some sort of joint measurement system of system strengthening in a country or in a particular district, and figure out how to get groups to work together on that? Because and it's precisely what Simon says, it's not about attribution, it's about contribution. It's about, I mean, a functioning system is only about contribution, not attribution, even if some funders want it to be about attribution. So I think I think in the challenge that Simon is facing, and you must have had 5 or 10 questions from others about why are you just trying to measure what WaterAid's contribution is to this, or why you're just trying to attribute to WaterAid what its share of this is. I think there may be a shift that needs to take place in this, or at least an attempt to try a different way of doing this that looks more broadly at the overall system. But that's, again, within the context of really thanking you guys for being out there and sharing this, because looking at the chat, I think you've got at least a 2 or 3 hour discussion to have here with a lot of people who know a lot more about measurement than I do. Yeah,
thanks, Lewis. Yeah, I'd say just on that, yeah, we are focusing on our contribution, but I'd just return back to the way we've been able to kind of set up the measurement framework has been in quite a participatory way, where we try to bring stakeholders together to arrive at a consensus of where is the WASH system now, and reconvening them to assess what changes have arisen, not just because of WaterAid's work, but more widely in the WASH system on an annual basis. So trying to do that, but yeah, recognizing that, yeah, we do want to see changes in the WASH system as a whole, not just because of the work that WaterAid is doing alone. And with regards, I saw a couple of questions about how do you measure the strength of the whole WASH system. And we're conscious that it's not just a case of strengthening individual components or building blocks that then results in having a strong WASH system. We're very conscious that the framework we've developed uses a building block framework, and as we evolve the tool, we do want to make sure that those dynamics and interactions between the building blocks and between the different people working within the system, changes in those aspects are also captured. And yeah, we're not there yet, as we say, it's an evolving process, and having a WASH system, yeah, isn't just the strength of those individual components. And so, yeah, we're working on it. And if you've got any thoughts on how we can best do that, do please share them with us.
Thanks, Hannah.
Ben.
Yeah, I just, there's been quite a lot of discussion in the chat box that I just sort of started trying to address around how do you like, how can you quantify it? Or people also kind of asking, can you, are you using some like predefined or example indicators, or are you having kind of structured lists that, people can choose from, or have you got kind of specific, markers of progress? And I think this is the balance that we're trying to work through at the moment. Based on your assessment, if you are kind of scoring things as good progress or medium progress, or if you're doing your building block assessment and you are ranking something as weak or moderate or strong, that you could turn that into a quantitative score if you needed to for any reason. However, the context is what's so important, I think, in this. So when we've done the building block assessment tool, the first step is to contextualize it and say, well, what would strong look like in this district? And therefore, any score isn't really going to be translatable, maybe not even to another district, let alone another country. So there are some things that we think we can do to improve the tool to give more guidance. I mentioned that we've broken the building blocks down into, say, subcomponents, and therefore, maybe we can look at kind of structuring our outcomes, say, more by subcomponent to kind of help make them more specific. But at the moment, we've tried to give as much flexibility to the tool as possible to be contextualized. And I think, as somebody said very, very well in the chat box, it is, philosophically, it's very similar to outcome mapping. It's saying, what is the desired situation that we want to see in this building block, and then making an assessment of your progress towards it, because that sort of approach does, on the whole, feel more appropriate when you're working with a range of different contexts. I think the only other thing to mention that sort of got touched on is that we are, collecting data on service levels at, say, the district where we are applying a system strengthening approach. So, whilst, exactly as people have already pointed out, whilst attribution would be hard, we would hope to see kind of a correlation. And ultimately, I think I'm right, and there are many more system strengthening experts on the call than me, but the ultimate purpose of strengthening the system is to see increases in those WASH service levels. So, and there may be other indicators that could be developed as well to monitor the strength of the system. But I imagine people also are in this bind of wanting to kind of capture your own contribution and your own progress, and then at the same time also wanting to assess the system as a whole. And I think people have also already talked about maybe working with other actors. So say there's the participatory way that, say, the building block assessment is done with a range of stakeholders to assess the strength of the WASH system. There's been a lot of conversation in the chat box, and we haven't got a huge amount of time, and I'm slightly losing track of all the questions. Is there anyone else who maybe wants to take the microphone, and because we haven't picked up your question in the chat box?
You mentioned a question for Caesar, I think.
Caesar, do you want to respond? I've seen you've been quite active in the chat box responding, but is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. I think there are really very many good questions there. But one of them I would want to respond to is how to get governments on side in terms of really appreciating system strengthening. And what we've been able to do with our service delivery building block, it helps us really to respond to some of the immediate WASH needs and to demonstrate to government that it's really not about these software engagements which do not contribute to the service delivery numbers government is interested. So we do a balance. We blend the service delivery by demonstrating really what works in terms of technologies that can be taken to scale by government. And then we engage on the rest of the other building blocks that are more of looking at the systems to improve and sustain those services. And increasingly, we are seeing politicians demanding that we support them in some of these really systemic blockages. Like the Lord Mayor this year was asking us, can you help us provide more space for engaging the citizens on ground, for them to appreciate challenges around sanitation? And now that's really very new, a politician demanding for such an engagement, and them not asking you to either provide a public sanitation facility where they can proudly inform their voters that this is something that we lobbied for, but instead they are asking for these kinds of things. So it's something that doesn't happen overnight, but through continuous engagement, we are able to change mindset. Yeah, so I think that's what I wanted to speak about. Then, thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Caesar. I don't know, we are nearly out of time. I don't know, Susan, I saw in the chat box, you talked about Agenda for Change and consulting with members in terms of how they're going about doing this work. So I don't know, and talked about sharing in the coming months. Maybe if you wanted to take the microphone and just give an update on that.
Sure, hi, and thanks. We have got a couple of consultants who have been interviewing all of our implementing members, that's 12, including WaterAid, and asking them what they're collecting around monitoring system strengthening. And they have just given us a report last week with some really interesting findings, and we're trying to find ways to get comments on that from across the membership. So we'll, in the next few weeks, you'll hear more about that, and we'll share with probably most of the people on this call. And I don't want to give away any secrets yet, but it's very interesting. The big picture is that most of our members are measuring similar types of things to what WaterAid is doing along the building blocks. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you. I think we are out of time. I don't know whether Caesar, Hannah, Ben, if you've got any final things you want to jump in on.
Hannah, there was a question about political economy analysis. Did you want to answer that one?
Yeah, if we've got time, or we can maybe, because I think there are a number of questions we didn't get to, whether we can share responses to all of them in writing, perhaps, to everyone. Yeah, as we're out of time.
Yeah, we're happy to do that, and what we'll do is we'll try and just provide a brief summary of this presentation and cover any questions that we haven't been able to answer. Sorry that we as someone said, we could have another 2 hours for the discussion, and maybe we will, but unfortunately not now. But as we've said, you know, we're very much it is a work in progress, and so we do welcome any feedback. So don't hesitate to get in touch with us directly if you've got any follow-up. But what we'll do is we will provide a summary. We'll share the presentation and provide a summary of the presentation with everybody, and answer any unanswered questions. Apologies for not getting around to them. So we'll leave it there, just to say thank you very much for joining us. It's really appreciated. Thank you to our presenters, and also thank you to Agenda for Change for helping to set up this meeting, especially to Alec for helping with the logistics, to a Zoom novice, and also to Stefan and Veronica, our translators for French and Spanish. So we'll leave it there, but yeah, just to say thanks very much, really appreciated, and let's carry on the discussion. Thank you.